This is the Consciously Created brand with me, Kirsty McGill. The Consciously Created brand is for the artists, creators, makers and curators, consciously creating businesses that aim to do better, putting planet and people over profit. So today we're going to be talking about making your website that bit greener, looking at the small changes you can make to maybe some of the more bigger things. And I want to give you some really actionable tips. The first thing is that often I think we don't really think about things like our website having a carbon footprint, or how social media and video streaming does too, or how our cloud storage is packed full of files, and that's got to be hosted somewhere. That's in a data center that's being powered, and obviously each time you transfer a file or download, that is also contributing to your carbon footprint. Did you know that if the internet was a country, it would be the 6th largest polluter? To be honest, this is something that I learnt about as I started Elmleaf Studio. I hadn't really thought about it that much before. And I think that's quite common and quite normal. So if you haven't thought about that, that's fine. But hopefully today will get you thinking about some of the things and making some small changes. The first thing to say is we don't need to all close down our online businesses and give up. Especially if you are doing big business because you want to make a difference, and you're not just doing business as usual. You are trying to focus on planet over profit, and you care about things like the environment, animal welfare, and you're making better products. I'd rather see companies like you succeed than some of the ones that don't put those things first. The fast fashion companies, the beauty brands that test on animals and don't care about the resources that they're using. And the good news is that there are many consumers who want to be choosing the better option nowadays too. I think we're all becoming more and more aware of the effect that we have on our planet, on the environment, and also coming to realise that we are in a climate crisis now. Climate change has been happening. It's something that I've been aware of since I was a child. But I think more and more we're understanding that actually this is kind of critical. And I think as individuals and as consumers, we can all play a part by trying to do small things. It doesn't always have to be the big things. And as business owners, we can try to do better. Ideally, I think big businesses have a big part to play. Of course, they are the ones with the money, the funding, the means to change, and of course often contributing to having the biggest effect. So let's bring it back to what we're talking about, and that's making your website greener. We'll focus on that today. The first thing you can do is see where your website is currently at, and you can use a tool like websitecarbon.com to see how much CO2 a page on your website produces. Now, of course, I recommend maybe trying a few different pages and seeing what the results are. You might be pleasantly surprised, or you might end up being kind of horrified. And know that then there's improvements you can make as you go along, rather than having to dramatically change things overnight. For example, like for me personally, even right now, I'd love to redo my website, incorporating everything I've been learning this past year. But my time is limited, and it can't be a priority to completely rework it to be as low as possible. And I've just had to kind of tweak what I can. And so these are some of the suggestions that I'll be making. One big and somewhat easy thing you could do is switch to a more eco-friendly hosting company. This is obviously if you are self-hosting your website somewhere. So not using a builder or a platform of things like Squarespace, Shopify, Showit or Wix. That's if you've got WordPress and obviously many other CMS too. Perhaps you've even built your website on the host's own website builder. So then you wouldn't be able to switch, actually saying that. But you could look at the options to in future make a switch. And there are things to consider as you look to switching. One of the things to think about is where the data center is actually located. One thing that most people wouldn't even think about, and again, myself included previously, I used to use like companies in America, some of the well-known ones, because obviously they're highly recommended, things like that. But I found out that if you are, for example, if you're a UK-based company and all or most of your customers are also in the UK, then you should choose a web host that has a UK data center, not a US based one, because this reduces the data transfer. It's not having to go as far. Another thing to look at is how they are powered. Some website hosts will be powered entirely by renewable energy, which is obviously fantastic. Others might utilize tactics such as carbon offsetting to boost their claims, but also that's still valid, and it's still better than choosing a host that doesn't care about those things or isn't transparent about that. And then you might also wish to look at what other commitments to good practices, so how they do business, what commitments they've made. Do they get involved in any good initiatives? Do they, I don't know, maybe put some of their profit to charitable causes or environmental programs? And then, of course, check their reviews. Same as you would with any other website hosting company, you can get a good sense of how they might be as a web host. Is their customer service good? How's their uptime? Have people had any issues? But always worth checking the reviews and seeing what people are saying. If you are looking to switch, there is a resource called the Green Web Foundation Directory, and you can look on there, and it's got loads of different more eco-friendly web hosts or green web hosts in all different countries. And like I said, obviously it's good to look for one that is near you or your customer base. And the good news is switching might not be as stressful as you could be imagining. In fact, a lot of web hosts will in fact help you migrate your website over to them, either for a small fee or sometimes for free. And that's definitely worth asking. If you don't have a developer or you don't have the tech skills to be able to do that yourself, see if a web host could help you try and migrate to them. If you are on one of these hosted platforms or you are using the builder for your web host company, one thing that you could think about is if you are looking at maybe redesigning your website at some point in the future, or indeed in rebranding, you could commit to making the change as part of that. Now, with the sort of, I call them hosted platforms, check their sustainability policies. When I was researching what might be the best solutions for clients at Elmleaf Studio, I was quite shocked to see that certain companies like Squarespace do not appear to be prioritising sustainability, and they lack any transparency about where they're hosted and the things that they're doing. It's quite surprising actually. Whereas, for example, Shopify, they do have policies in place, they're transparent with what they're doing. It seems like they care about sustainability and they have aims, and the hosting itself is green. They even write reports. So yeah, it's very, very much more upfront, comparing complete contrast to Squarespace. And then I also did look at Webflow. I believe it was hard to find, but I did find in a forum, someone from their company said that what did they say? I think it's hosted with Amazon basically. So that, isn't the worst for hosting. A lot of that I think is renewably powered. Again, maybe worth checking. But yeah, it was quite hard to find much information on that one. And I think the same for a lot of the other platforms too. It's just hard to find anything out about it. Let's go into other tweaks that you can make on your actual website itself now. One thing to think about is, obviously, as I said, every time a website page loads, that is energy use. So if you can minimize the amount of page loads that someone's doing on your site, then you will have a more efficient website. Now, obviously, you want people to be exploring your website, but in terms of usability anyway, what you don't want is a confusing navigation. You want to be able to get people to where they want to go, because ultimately that's going to be resulting in sales. If someone gets frustrated trying to find what they're trying to find on your website, they're just going to leave. If your menu's a mess, if you don't have filters on your category and product pages, for example, people are just going to get frustrated potentially. And again, if links are all over the place or if things don't work very well or as expected. So making your website easier to navigate is a win-win, both for conversions and of course for making your website a little bit greener. The next thing you can look at is reducing your overall website size. If you think about how each page has a size to it, if you can reduce the pages, especially if there's content that's there but like you're not linking to it from anywhere anymore. So delete old pages, for example. Delete products that are no longer in existence, like if you've got them archived, that could be worth deleting off and just cleaning out. Minimizing how much loads on each page, and that can be the things that you see, but it can also be things like the scripts that are loaded. If you're calling in a lot of things like custom fonts, often things like your newsletter will have some JavaScript or jQuery that is put on the page, as well as the HTML if you've got those things. In general, the smaller your website is, the faster it is as well. Again, it's a win-win on this one. You can do things like not having too much video, and certainly don't autoplay. That's also bad practice from an accessibility point, from a user perspective. Something that could be quite easy to implement would be a caching service, which will serve visitors a copy of aspects of your website rather than freshly loading them each time. So it makes it faster and it makes it more efficient too. Another consideration, this is particularly relevant if you're an e-commerce site or if you have a lot of images, such as on a blog as well. You could use a content delivery network, and this reduces the page load by serving the content from a data center that is nearer to the website visitor, kind of like what I was saying about the hosting. This makes your website faster, and the data doesn't travel as far as if your website is hosted in a completely different country. Following on from this, ensure your photos are safe for web, please, especially if you have a lot of photos like on e-commerce. This can make a huge difference. Even nowadays, even if you've taken a photo on your smartphone and directly uploaded it, that is actually a huge photo. You need to be saving them to the maximum width that they're going to be viewed at, that's in pixels. And then you also need to set the DPI to be lower, so save them as a lower res image. You won't get blurry, you won't get pixels if you save them right, but they don't need to be the same resolution as they would be for print. So that is, 72 DPI. And then a further step you can do to optimize is using a service like TinyPNG. And what that will do is strip extra data from the image, and then again it makes them even smaller. Definitely look at switching out the largest images on your site. That would be a really quick win you could take today. A small point to make is that saving images as JPEGs are usually smaller in size than PNGs, as they have less data. And also this one you might not think about, but GIFs are actually quite large file sizes usually. So again, minimizing your use of that and choosing JPEGs as the main product imagery or website imagery file type if you can. Or using vector illustrations where you can also cut down on the size. Now obviously you probably won't do this for your products, although I did see a really cool example of Organic Basics have created a low impact version of their site, and they make use of illustrations rather than photos for each product image because it can make such a huge difference to the file size. So they say their low impact website reduces data transfer by up to 70% in comparison to our regular website. Check that out. Obviously probably not realistic for most people, and they've got the budget to have both websites and to have had these custom illustrations done that showcase the product. And it makes sense for their product too, because they are basics. You know, everyone can kind of visualize what a t-shirt looks like, and a vest and pants. One more tip is potentially looking at making a darker color palette, minimizing web fonts and limiting animations. Again, the darker color uses less power, and obviously if it's not on brand for you, you don't want to be putting dark colors across your whole website. But you could look at using them in certain places. So your footer could be a darker color maybe. You could do rows and sections in a darker tint from your brand's colour palette, if that's relevant. Like I mentioned, another one is minimizing your custom web fonts on your site. So I'm obviously all about having a beautifully branded website, and it looks great if you can have the same fonts from your brand, the same as you would on print or anywhere else or across on Instagram. Whilst I do recommend using that, especially if you've got a prominent font, so like a really nice display font that you use for headings and things like that, but maybe you could then consider using a web safe font which is one that a typical computer system font would be. So things like Arial, most people have that Calibri, and that could be then used as the body copy. And because everyone has them, it's not running that extra script for bringing in the font. It's already on someone's computer, so they'll just see the font as it is. Final tip would be then limiting animations. Like everything else, the animated effect, it adds extra code to the website. It can make the page load slower. Limiting them will make your website smaller and faster. The biggest thing to take away is the smaller your site, the more green your site is. Now, I'd love to know what questions you have or what your biggest takeaway is. Are there any actions you're going to now take that you're going to plan to take? I'd love to hear from you, and you can come and chat to me on Instagram at Elmleaf Studio. Thank you for listening today, and I'll be back soon. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find the show notes at elmleafstudio.com/podcast. I'd love to connect over on Instagram, and that's at Elmleaf Studio. If you'd like to stay updated, you can also join my newsletter. And if you go to elmleafstudio.com/newsletter, you can sign up there, and you'll also get access to my free resource library. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Consciously Created Brand.